about his dad. This programme was first broadcast 3 years ago, back in 2005.
I started to teach myself to tap dance very gradually. Ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. And they started to laugh, to my annoyance. So I thought, well, all right, then if they want to laugh, I tripped deliberately, and they laughed louder. So I thought, oh, well, if that's what they want, and I tripped and I fell over flat on the floor deliberately. And they screamed with laughter, and as I was laying on the floor, I thought to myself, that's it, comedy.
Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh. Don't you know everyone wants to laugh? My dad said, be an actor, my son, but be a comical one, they'll be sad.
Norman Wisdom is one of the most popular entertainers of all time. Right until he technically retired earlier this year at the age of 90, the cheeky chappie with the cloth cap and the funny walk and the pithy songs and the truly terrible gags could have an entire audience in stitches just by walking onto a stage and tripping. His son, Nick Wisdom, has chosen a career about as far from Sunday night at the London Palladium as you can get. Was that deliberate, Nick?
Well, I actually did once have an interview, or an audition I should say, to see if I was good enough for an audition to go into show business, and I didn't get through that. But I think the problem there was that, having been with my father for 52 years now, things rub off, and I could have only really have done his sort of brand of humour, and to try and follow him would have been not a very good idea, I don't think.
So what did you end up doing?
I was on the county staff at Sussex County Cricket Club for 2 or 3 years, way back in 1970s, and I didn't make the grade at cricket, and I went into a sports business, so I run a sports shop, and I have been for 28 years.
Your dad had quite a struggle clambering to the top of the bill after we heard him there talking about how he got started with that trip when he was in the army, and then he did the rounds of the music halls and the clubs, as so many of these great entertainers did in the early days. Had he made it by the time you came along? I mean, what was the sort of circumstances as you were growing up?
Well, I would say he was well on the way, because I was born in 1953, and then his first film, Trouble in Store, was around that time, and that was a hit. And then, my early years were him being at Pinewood Studios making films, really, and he was doing films, and then he was actually going off to London, maybe at the Palladium or wherever, and doing a show in the evening, working very hard.
Did you go and watch him? Did you spend time with him on the set?
Yes, we. My sister and I, we were at Pinewood Studios quite a lot, actually. Very interesting.
Yeah, what was it like in these days, the great Pinewood?
Well, I never knew how they ever finished the film. I mean, nothing ever seemed to get done, and there was a lot of mucking around. I think the director was pulling his hair out. I suppose it did get finished, but I think it always overran.
Was it as much fun off set, as it were, as it seemed to be on the films?
Yes, I think. I think the director had to be pretty strong. I think he had a few dressing downs, and he would drag other people into it, to take 10, take 11, all this sort of thing. But of course the films did get done in the end, but I never knew how.
Because I got the impression with your dad that he could never stop himself performing. There was a kind of anarchic tendency with him always to go the extra trip or the extra gag. Is that right? I mean, did he ever turn off?
Not really. No, I think it's 24 hours a day, really. He wouldn't be normal if he had turned off, I don't think.
And what's that to live with? What's that like?
Well, you get used to it. It's not that normal a life, really, is it, when you think about it? But you get used to it, and of course it rubs off on me. I'm a little bit like that. I have to be pretty serious in my shop when I'm serving people, yeah. But life gets very boring if there's no humour in the day, that's for sure.
And what do you find yourself doing? Do you find yourself doing strange walks or?
No, I don't. Not too much of that. I'm always, I don't know. There's always things that happen in the shop that are quite amusing, and you can ham them up a little bit.
So, what was life like then with Norman Wisdom as a father? Give me a sense of daily life in the Wisdom household.
He liked to be, when I say waited on, it wasn't quite the same. I mean, he could never dress himself. We had quite an old house, and you know, you get the old houses with the bells, bedroom 1, bedroom 2 and all that sort of thing, and bedroom 1 would ring and my mother would have to go up and bring his tea up, and but of course she could only open the curtain 6 inches. It couldn't be drawn all the way. Then she'd go back down, then bedroom 1 would ring again, and then she'd have to bring the curtains right back. And then he'd say, like, what am I wearing today? And she'd have to go through the whole itinerary of what he had in his wardrobe, and then he'd choose what he wanted to wear. So once you got that out of the way and he came down, I mean, it would be a nightmare. Christmas Day, we'd all be waiting to open our presents, and he wouldn't come down till about 11:30. You try keeping children off presents till that time of the morning.
It sounds very funny the way you describe that, Nick, but I wonder, was that behaviour, I mean, it's faintly tyrannical and sort of perfectionist almost to a fault. Was that difficult to live with, certainly for your mother?
I think more for my mother, actually, yes. As children, we found it very amusing. I think my mother was quite disciplinarian, certainly at the dinner table, you know, with table manners, and my father had interesting table manners. I won't say bad, but to say interesting.
In what way?
Well, he'd start picking up the knife and fork, and he'd use everything. You know, he'd do a drum solo around all the cups and saucers and everything, and we'd have to carry on. And my mother would sit there, sort of breathing fire at him. You know, she would bring in a sort of like a ginger pudding. I always remember that, and he sort of did a plane coming into land and landed his finger straight into the top of the pudding and nearly had his finger taken off by a knife, actually, I might say. So yes, you sort of remember those things, the silly things, but I mean, that's what made him what he is, I suppose.
I wonder, he had a terrible childhood himself, didn't he?
Yes.
A monster of a father, a mother who walked out on the family, perhaps for very understandable reasons. A life then wandering the streets, sleeping rough before he went to sea, and then he joined the army. I mean, it was like something, as I think he said, out of Charles Dickens. Did he talk to you about these experiences and what effect they might have had on him as a person and indeed as a father?
No, he didn't really, I have to say, no. It's come out more in later life. When he wrote his first book, it came out. I mean, I was aware of, you know, him walking to Cardiff and all that sort of thing and sleeping under a bench, but he didn't hark on about it. I mean, he was always going on about the army and the 10th Royal Hussars and all that, very proud to be in that. I think that was, you know, a wonderful thing for him to go to India and be in the army. He loved that.
It's not unknown for sons of abusive fathers to be poor at fatherhood themselves when they've had no role model. What effect do you think that his own experience of fatherhood had on the kind of father he was?
Well, I think he was very, very affected by the treatment he got from his father. He never, ever mentioned him. Never. But it certainly hasn't rubbed off. I mean, he's been a wonderful father to my sister and me. It was interesting that his father was actually buried in the same town as my sports shop in Haywards Heath, and he did ask to come to see the burial site actually a couple of years ago. But to be honest, before then he hasn't really mentioned it.
What was he like at home? Was he always performing? Was he playing his musical instruments? Did you feel very much that this is the home of a performer?
Oh yes, definitely. I wouldn't say he was playing his instruments too much. Yes, he'd get the clarinet out and whatever, and just have a little practice session now and again. And people would come down, visit us, some stars, and we'd have a lot of laughs, and it would be good fun.
He was a great singer too, wasn't he? He sang a lot in his act. He composed songs. He recorded with the likes of Joyce Grenfell, didn't he? Did he sing much at home? All
the time. He's always in song.
What sort of things would he sing at home?
Whatever came into his head, really. I mean, there wouldn't be songs, a lot of them. They would just be whatever he was talking about would be to music, virtually.
You know what this reminds me of, don't you?
What? Oh, ruining the music, this is.
Oh, please.
You'll go all bang in a minute.
Don't laugh. Can't help it.